In this video I'm going to clean the aperture of this lens. There's oil on the aperture blades which prevent them from moving freely. This can be a problem and cause your photos to get overexposed. There's this spring tension lever on the back of the lens which the camera uses to change the aperture while you're shooting. So when you take a photo it's supposed to close down just by the force of the spring, but you can see that it gets stuck. And because of this issue with the lens, I bought it at a discount, and I'm hoping to clean the aperture and get it back to full working order. The first task to disassemble the lens is to remove this front face. And to unscrew this part, I use a friction tool. This is just a rubber ring. You can buy these on Amazon. The rubber ring just helps to get a good grip on the nameplate part so you can unscrew it. Next we have some screws that need to be unscrewed. The first 3 screws are holding both the filter thread and the front lens element. This lens is nice to work on because the front part of the lens is one assembly of multiple lens elements. And this assembly is easy to remove and install. So here I am removing the filter ring. That's just a small plastic part with threads to screw your camera filters onto. Then we have 2 screws holding the front lens assembly. I noticed that there was oil on this front assembly, so I wipe it away here with a Q-tip. I cleaned all the surfaces inside of the lens with lighter fluid. I don't know why lighter fluid is useful for cleaning lenses, but I've seen other camera repairmen on YouTube using lighter fluid and it seems to work. Inside the lens here we see a copper part. This is a thin piece which has tabs sticking into the lens body, holding the aperture to the lens housing. So this has got 3 screws that need to be removed, and then you can get this copper part out. It was difficult to figure out how to remove it, and I was being very gentle because I didn't want to accidentally stab the aperture with my screwdriver. But in the end, it turned out that I only needed to push with a little bit of force towards the center of the lens, so towards the aperture. And that bends the copper part and you can get it out. So here we have the disassembled aperture. And I've just cleaned it. I finished cleaning it with Q-tips and lighter fluid. Assembling the aperture after it's been disassembled is a bit tricky because you have to get these blades aligned and you need to place them carefully into small holes. They've got these pegs on both sides that on the one side they go into a fixed hole, and then on the other side they are guided by this curved slot that you see. And I got some practice on assembling the aperture because I had to reassemble it every time I failed to insert the aperture back into the lens body. I failed many times at inserting the aperture in the lens body because any small movement in the wrong direction and it just fell apart. There's nothing holding these 2 parts of the 2 sides of the aperture are not held together in any way. They're just completely loose, and you've got all these aperture blades sandwiched between them. And I struggled a long time with trying to figure out how to insert this aperture in the lens body, but then finally I realized that I could use the rubber friction tool that I was using at the start to unscrew the nameplate. So this rubber friction tool was a perfect dimension to insert into the lens body, and I could just stand it on my desk and balance the aperture on top of it, and then slide the lens housing on top over the aperture that way. However, the tricky part of doing this is that you still have to align the aperture, because it's got a slot in it where there's a lever in the lens that needs to go through the slot to actuate the aperture. So I'm showing here soon how that works. So now I'm just testing the aperture with this toothpick, and that slot that I'm using to move the aperture is the opening where the lever in the lens has to go through. And if you get that wrong and it's not right, then the aperture will just fall apart when you flip it over. So here I finally got it back together, and I flip it over, and it seems like it's in place, but it's not fully seated yet. So it's important that the two sides of the aperture are sandwiched well together and holding the blades in their right positions. So I played around with the aperture a bit, and the aperture blades got misaligned, as you can see here. So to fix this, I just tried shifting the aperture around, turning it slightly and pushing on it with my fingers. And eventually it just seemed to be in a better position, and it started working without problem. So here I'm testing the aperture when it's finally in the right position. Then I have to install the copper part again to hold the aperture in place. Installing this part back is very simple. Just slide it into one of the openings with one side, and then the other tab, you can gently bend it to insert that tab. After I had screwed the copper piece back, then the aperture was installed, so I could then install the front lens assembly. Installing the front lens assembly was very easy.